I want to bring in Elizabeth Wydra, who is Chief Counsel at the Constitutional Accountability Center, Kenji Yoshino, Constitutional Law Professor at NYU Law School, and Jamal Green, Constitutional Law Professor at Columbia University. Jamal, what's your headline out of this?
I think the headline out of this is it's basically a win for the federal government here. I don't think anyone really expected the court to uphold the portion of the law that was struck down. And in the course of striking down the rest of the law, the court said some pretty broad language about the sense in which there's a national immigration policy that states really aren't allowed to interfere with in any way.
Would you agree with that, Elizabeth? Is this a win for the feds?
I think it is a win for the feds. I think it's a victory for the Constitution, and I think it's a victory for the American people that the court invalidated these 3 out of the 4 provisions of SB 1070. And I would argue that even though the court upheld the Show Me Your Papers section today, I think that is merely a victory delayed, because there are still proceedings that are going on. For example, the lawsuits by civil rights groups that challenge the Show Me Your Papers provision, that one particular one that squeaked by today in the Supreme Court. And I think that in those cases that are still ongoing, that I think it's likely that the provision will be eventually found unconstitutional.
Kenji, will it eventually be found unconstitutional?
I think it really depends on how it's enforced. So we have to see how this law operates on the ground. It actually hasn't gone into effect yet, precisely because this ruling was pending. So now we have to see whether or not the Show Me Your Papers law on the ground, as enforced, is going to result in racial profiling. I'm actually with Elizabeth in thinking that it probably will be. If it is, then an equal protection challenge can be brought, and that will probably be successful in the Supreme Court.
Well, let me ask you then, Kenji, and I'll ask all of you, what do you think the real-life impact is if you're an illegal immigrant, you're living and working somewhere in America, particularly right now, living or working in Arizona? How does your life change, or does it?
Well, I think the real concern is that we're creating 2 Americas, people who actually feel safe going about their business and people who don't, simply because of their demographic characteristics. And I want to emphasize that I understand that, SB 1070 did not say that racial profiling was permitted. I just don't think that, I think it's naive to think that on the ground this is going to operate in any other way than to create an unsafe environment for individuals who are persons of color, who are going to be either Latino or, African American or what have you, or Asian American for that matter. And so I think that the equal protection violations are going to be successful precisely because it's really hard to thread the needle and to understand how this could be applied in anything but a way that would involve racial profiling. So I think that many individuals are going to live in fear or with great concern for that.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you're nodding, and we've talked about the fact over the last couple of minutes just that this is going to be winding its way through the courts for the next couple of years. But again, if you're an illegal immigrant right now living in Arizona, what does this mean for you?
I think the key thing to think about is this professed goal of Arizona's to achieve attrition through enforcement. And while there certainly was a blow to that policy with the court's ruling today, I think the fact that Section 2, the Show Me Your Papers provision, was allowed to go into effect is going to have a real impact on the lives of people in Arizona. But I would note that the Supreme Court left open the possibility that the federal government could come in again after the law goes into effect, as Kenji mentioned, and say that this attrition through enforcement, as it's applied in Arizona, is preempted, that it's in contradiction to federal immigration policy. And it's important for the federal government, under its constitutionally delegated powers, to be able to balance all the myriad concerns of foreign affairs, humanitarian considerations, and resources when it determines how to enforce immigration laws. And Arizona really doesn't have the right to decide that. And I think that that's something that the courts will look at as this case proceeds as well.
Do you think, Jamal, that this puts a lot of people in a dangerous situation?
Well, I think a lot of the impact of the law is largely symbolic in the sense that it does suggest to people who are brown-skinned, people of color, that there's going to be a special eye trained to them. But I would emphasize the point that the court here did not say that the law is necessarily going to be applied in a constitutional way. It said, let's wait and see. And so there will be a lot of pressure both from the federal government and on civil rights groups to keep the pressure on and to make sure that this law is being enforced in an even-handed way.